There is a certain kind of silence that is not empty at all. It is the silence of someone who is watching, absorbing, understanding, but choosing not to speak. If you have ever been called quiet, you have probably also been misunderstood. People assume silence means shyness, insecurity, or lack of confidence. But often, it is the opposite. Quiet people are not empty, they are full of observations, thoughts, patterns, and emotions that rarely make it to the surface. And over time, this creates a unique psychological pattern. They notice things most people miss, but they rarely say them out loud. Not because they do not want it, but because they have learned that speaking does not always lead to being understood. Quiet people develop this habit early in life. Often, it begins in environments where speaking up did not feel safe, valued, or necessary. Maybe they were interrupted too often. Maybe their emotions were dismissed. Or maybe they simply realized that observing gave them more control than expressing. So instead of reacting, they learned to watch. Instead of speaking, they learned to listen. And slowly, their mind became a kind of internal recorder, constantly picking up details about people, behavior, tone, and emotional shifts. They notice when someone's smile does not reach their eyes. They notice when a person says, "I am fine," but their energy feels heavy. They notice the small pauses in conversations, the hesitation in someone's voice, the way someone avoids certain topics. But here is the part most people do not see. Noticing is not the same as judging. Quiet people are not always sitting there criticizing others. In fact, many of them are deeply empathetic. Their silence gives them space to understand people in a way that loud environments do not allow. They read between words. They sense what is not being said. And this creates a strange emotional tension inside them. Because when you see things clearly, but do not express them, those thoughts do not disappear. They stay. They build. They echo. Over time, this can turn into overthinking. A quiet person might replay a conversation long after it ends, analyzing every word, every tone, every reaction. Not because they want to, but because their brain is wired to search for meaning. They ask themselves questions like, did they mean that the way it sounded? Why did their energy change when that topic came up? Was I too much or not enough? And while others move on quickly, quiet people carry the moment with them. This is where their strength becomes a burden. Because being observant also means being sensitive to emotional shifts. They can feel when something is off, even when no one else notices. But instead of confronting it, they often stay silent. Why? Because somewhere along the way, they learned that speaking up might create conflict, or worse, rejection. So they choose peace over expression, understanding over confrontation, silence over risk. And this choice, repeated over years, shapes their adult relationships. Quiet people often become the understander in their relationships, the one who listens, supports, and adapts. They are the ones who notice when their partner is distant, but do not always bring it up. They are the ones who sense tension in friendships, but try to smooth it over quietly. They are the ones who give others the benefit of the doubt, even when something feels wrong. But this creates an imbalance, because while they understand others deeply, they often feel unseen themselves. Not because people do not care, but because quiet people do not always show what is happening inside them. And if something is not expressed, it is easy for others to assume everything is fine. This leads to a subtle kind of loneliness. The kind where you are surrounded by people, but feel like no one really knows you. The kind where you listen to everyone else's problems, but do not share your own. The kind where you notice everything about others, but feel invisible in return. And over time, this can affect their sense of self. Quiet people may start to question whether their thoughts are worth sharing. They may feel like their voice does not carry weight, or they may become so used to observing that they forget how to express. But here is the deeper truth. Silence is not the problem. The problem is when silence becomes suppression. Because there is a difference between choosing not to speak and feeling unable to speak, and feeling unable to speak. Quiet people do not lack depth, they often have too much of it. Their inner world is rich, complex, and emotionally intelligent. They see patterns others overlook. They understand emotions others ignore. They sense authenticity, and they recognize when it is missing. But when this awareness is not shared, it stays trapped inside. And anything trapped, no matter how insightful, can turn into emotional weight. This is why some quiet people feel mentally exhausted without knowing why. It is not just life, it is the constant processing, the constant noticing, the constant holding back. Imagine carrying dozens of unspoken observations every day. Small things, subtle things, emotional things. Each one alone is manageable, but together they create a quiet pressure. And that pressure needs release. Not necessarily through loud expression, but through safe expression. Because quiet people do not need to become loud to be heard. They just need to feel safe enough to be real. When a quiet person finds that safety, whether in a person, a space, or even within themselves, something shifts. They begin to open. Not all at once, but slowly, carefully, authentically. And when they do speak, it carries weight. Because it is not impulsive, It is intentional. It is not noise, it is clarity. And often, what they say reflects everything they have been observing all along. This is why when a quiet person finally expresses something, it can feel surprisingly deep, because they have already thought about it from multiple angles. They have already processed the emotional layers. They have already considered how it might affect others. What seems like a simple sentence is actually the result of deep internal work. But here's the part that matters most. Quiet people do not need to change who they are. Their silence is not a flaw. Their awareness is not a flaw. Their awareness is not a burden. Their depth is not something to hide. But they do need balance, because constantly observing without expressing leads to disconnection from others, and eventually from themselves. The goal is not to speak more. The goal is to express more honestly, even if it is in small ways, even if it feels uncomfortable at first. Because every time a quiet person shares something real, they reclaim a part of themselves that was hidden. And over time, this builds a sense of inner stability. They no longer feel invisible because they are no longer hiding. They no longer feel misunderstood because they are allowing themselves to be known. And perhaps most importantly, they begin to trust their own voice. Because the truth is, what quiet people notice matters. Their insights matter. Their emotions matter. Their perspective matters. Even if it is not loud, even if it is not frequent, even if it is not always easy to share. And the world does not need them to become someone else. It just needs them to stop believing that silence is the only safe place to exist. Because real connection does not happen when everything is perfectly understood. It happens when something real is finally said. And if you see yourself in this, if you are someone who notices everything but says very little, then maybe the next step is not to change your nature. Maybe it is simply this. Let one thought out, just one. Not everything. Not all at once, just something honest. Because your silence has protected you. But your voice, that is what will connect you. And you deserve to be understood, not just as the one who notices everything, but as someone who is finally seen.